Manipur, Rajat also helped in BJP's campaign during the 2016 elections. He wrote a book, The Last Battle of Saraighat, BJP's Rise in Northeast. And those of you who don't know about Saraighat, that's a very famous battle which took place in 16th century, where Mughal armies and the Ahom armies fought. So I think Rajat uses, not I think I've read the book, Rajat uses that battle to sort of like, in the contemporary context, what is happening in our politics. And we also have Arunabh Saikia, who's a journalist with the Scroll, and he has been writing extensively on Assam and Northeast. And my name is Rahul Verma. I work here at CPR. So does my colleague Neelanjan Sircar. He's also an associate professor at Ashoka University of Political Science. Okay, so let me sort of give you a context about the Assam elections. And how do I? Yes. Okay, so this is a map from the Election Commission of India press release, where they basically said that this Assam election is going to happen in three phases. So the first phase, if you can look at my cursor, this is the first phase. 47 assembly constituencies are going to poll in the first phase that will take place on 27th of March. This is also known as the Lower Assam, or sorry, Assam, Upper Assam. This contains the districts of Tinsukia, Dibrugarh, Lakhisarai, and these regions. The second phase, which is going to happen on April 1st, the lower part is actually the Barak Valley, which is so Barak Valley has districts of Kachar, and I'm sorry if I'm going to mispronounce certain names. I don't fully know these names. And then the Karbi, East and West Karbi Anglong districts. And then the third phase is going to happen on 6th of April, 40 assembly constituencies. The top portion is what is known as Bodoland or Bodo territorial region. And together, much of this region is known as Lower Assam. So those of you who care about Assam tea, most of the tea is basically grown in these regions: Lakhisarai, Dibrugarh, Tinsukia. Bodo regions are uh, Bailasa, Kokrajhar, and Chirag. And Assam also has a very high Muslim population, which is around 35. And much of this is concentrated in a couple of districts, which is Dhubrigarh, Golapara, and Kamrup. Basically, these three districts around Meghalaya, and then Karimganj and some in Kachar. So these are basically Muslim-dominated districts. This was just to give you an idea about the political geography of Assam. Brahmaputra somewhere sort of like divides the lower and upper Assam into two halves. It basically passes through this region. Assam has 126 assembly constituencies, and so the winner actually needs to get 64 plus. These two graphs basically just to show you what has happened in Assam politics in last 10 years. BJP, which was a minor player pre-2014, basically uh, increases its vote share by 4 times, right? They were getting somewhere around 10% of the votes, and in 2014, they get around 38, 39%. In 2016, they had a 30% vote share, and 2019 they had 37, 38% vote share. But mind you, this is just BJP's vote share. BJP also had two allies, Assam Gun Parishad and Bodo People's Front, and combined in 2016 they had more than 40% of vote share. There is a slight decline in Congress vote share from 2011, but they have roughly maintained their vote share around 30 to 33%. But because BJP had two allies, which they were sort of like pulling vote shares for the party, naturally BJP was getting more seats, which is reflected here. So despite these two parties getting same votes, the seat share gap was very, very high because BJP's allies were also sort of like helping them to get more seats. And this becomes much more clear when you look at the strike rate of major party. By strike rate, what we mean is how many sort of like given a certain proportion of vote, how many seats or proportion of seats you are winning. So BJP strike rate in 2016 was above 60%, and in 2019 it was around 75-76%. So Assam has 14 parliamentary constituency. BJP last time won 9. Its allies didn't win anything. Congress won 3 seats. One seat was by AIUDF, and the last seat was by an independent who defeated the Bodo People's Front candidate on that seat. What we have done in this graph with help of my colleague Naja, so as I told you in my first slide, that Assam is going to poll in 3 phases this time. So what we did, basically we extrapolated those 3 phases to 2016 and 2019 result. And what you see here, that BJP actually did well in all 3 phases, but they are likely to do much better in what is going to be phase 1, which is Upper Assam, and they face sort of some trouble in Barak Valley region, or the second phase, and the third phase, which is Lower Assam, BJP again picks up. So you have to understand sort of like this political geography. What are the areas where BJP does well? What are the areas where AIUDF does well? And what are the areas where Congress does well? Finally, this is just to this is the data from Lokniti CSDS election studies, just to give you a picture of what is happening in Assam. And Neelanjan is going to raise some of these questions with Arunabh and with Rajat and with Sandhya ji. Basically, there is a clear religious polarization that has happened in Assam, which is along the lines of not just Hindus and Muslims, but also it has also some sort of language angle. So AIUDF was largely a party of Bengali Muslims. But what has happened over the years, that their sort of support among this group, which was around 45% in 2014, it was higher in 2011, suddenly sort of like, got declined in 2016 to 39, and now it has come down to 13%. So AIUDF is going down among Bengali Muslims. Congress basically increases its presence among Assamese Muslims, but it loses its support base among Bengali Hindus. So Congress used to get around 1/4 to 1/3 of Bengali Hindu voters, which basically in 2019 was less than 1/10. On the other hand, BJP slowly, or NDA slowly gained or stabilized its support among Assamese Hindu, and AGP is part of the reason why that might be happening. But what also happened, which is very interesting, is that they made massive gains among Bengali Hindus. So they were getting around 2/3, 68 or 65% in 2014 and 2016. But in 2019, that vote share went up to 87, 88%. So basically, language plus region seems to be the key divide which is shaping up Assam's politics today. We know that post 2019, there has been shifts in alliance. So BPF has left, Bodo People's Front has left the NDA and has joined the Congress party. Also, AIUDF has aligned with the Congress party. And then there are certain new players which have emerged after the CA NRC protest. I basically leave it here and ask my colleague Neelanjan to sort of like pick some of these points and also what he has in mind to kickstart the discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rahul. A wonderful way to start, putting everything in context. So 5 years ago, I spent quite a bit of time in Assam during the elections. And what I learned is that I don't understand Assam. It's an extraordinarily complicated landscape, politically, in terms of linguistic divides, religious divides, ethnic divides, whatever one wants to use. And so I'm going to largely stay in the shadows here, ask a sort of an oriented question, but leave it to the experts here to decode Assam for us. And hopefully I can sort of guide the direction in places that are interesting for all of you that are listening out there in cyberspace. And as we go along, please feel free to ask questions in the question. You can there's a separate Q&A bar here, and we will read out of those Q&As that we get to see in front of us, and we will sort of allot them across panelists. So I wanted to start with Sandhya ji. As I said, this is an incredibly complicated environment, and I just want to see if you can start us off by sort of taking us from where Rahul has left us, right? So 2016 onward, after the defeat of the Congress, can you tell us a little bit about how the political environment in Assam has evolved, especially in light of former Chief Minister Gogoi's passing? Sandhya ji, can you hear me? I think maybe some technical difficulties. We've been having a few technical difficulties. Let me start by sending that question over to Arunabh, and we'll bring in Sandhya ji if we're able to sort of connect. She'd messaged us saying that she's dealing with severe thunderstorms over in Assam, and connection is coming in and out. So hopefully we'll be able to get her back on. I'm seeing that her volume is not, her microphone is not on. So maybe we can try to message her separately and just let her know that, try to turn on her microphone. And Sandhya ji, if you can hear us here, please try to turn on your microphone. Let me send this question over to Aruna. Can you tell us a little bit about how the political environment has changed since 2016? Obviously a lot has changed, including the death of the former chief minister. But just give the audience here, some of who are quite knowledgeable about Assam, but some who aren't, a little bit of an overview as to what has happened.
Neelanjan, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be able to articulate this half as well as Professor Sandhya. But yeah, I'll give it a shot. Tarun Gogoi's death was an important event, of course, but I suppose, there have been more important, there have been far more important events that have, so to speak, convulsed Assam over the last couple of years. 2016, BJP's storm to power. It had a strike rate of nearly 70%. So it was to no one's surprise. Anybody who wanted to, who was willing to see it, could see it, that BJP was going to come to power. Maybe the Congress's decline was a little too dramatic than what a lot of us thought. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't a surprise. After that, the citizenship amendment bill, that came in, and Assam, Assam was the first state to see protests, way before it happened in the rest of the country. In fact, Assam saw protests way back in in the winter of 2018, right? Yes, when the bill was introduced in the Lok Sabha. And that was a very strange time as a reporter, because I remember going to Upper Assam, traveling through around the 4 districts of Upper Assam in the January of 2019, right? That was when the protests had just started, and there was a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. This was just before Mag Bihu, right? The harvest festival, the Assam Harvest Festival, and at that point, I happened to attend a meeting, of BJP workers in Dibrugarh, very close to Vindhakota, which is the which is where the CM was born, grew up. And a lot of them told me that they were scared to go out, and the campaign. So the Sonwal Kachari Autonomous Council, which is not a fictional autonomous council, which is but an autonomous council nonetheless, was going to go to polls later that month in January, and this guy just couldn't go out to campaign. And so that was January, and I went back to Assam. I went back to Upper Assam 2019 April. The mood had completely changed, and as it turned out, BJP romped through Upper Assam in the Lok Sabha election 2019. And as it so turns out, it also had a thumping victory in the Sonwal Kachari Autonomous Council election. So to speak, a lot has changed in Assam since 2016. I mean, from afar, it looks, Assam is going through a major churn, but a lot has also not changed. I think if I'm a reporter, and this is a cardinal sin for me to predict elections and call elections. But at the very outset, I still say that this is still BJP's election to lose, despite what it may look like. And Tarun Gogoi's death, if anything, has probably probably made the road somewhat easier. I mean, I'm sure we'll go into nuances of it and later, but this is where I suppose we should this is where I see these elections a month ago. This is how I see these elections.
Let's sort of take that as a starting point, because I think that is the general view. You can see that when we visited 5 years ago from a team from CPR, I think we could see the change coming, right? And we could see that it was fairly obvious that Congress was in trouble. Today, one way in which the Congress is trying to shore up its strength is by sort of looking at these alliances, right? And we know that historically, the political landscape in Assam has been quite fractured, and alliances have been the name of the game, whether it be AGP, whether it be AIUDF, whether it be BPF. So I wanted to sort of go through perhaps what impact the alliances that Congress is striking in Assam might have on electoral outcomes, and whether, this is just me speaking as a political scientist quickly, we often make this mistake of just adding vote shares, when you see two parties. But of course, there's a question of how well alliances work, whether counterpolarization can take place against an alliance. And I wonder with AIUDF, especially because a lot of their vote share has been shifting away towards Congress, to what extent do you feel that it is going to sew up some of the seats, particularly, let's say, in Barak Valley and so on and so forth? And to what extent do you think that it can actually generate counterpolarization? And I'd like both of you to come in on this if possible. Rajat and Arunabh.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go on.
All right, let me take a try on this. So a few things first. In 2016, when we were, trying to start the 2015, mid of 2015, and that is when we started understanding that there were fissures within the Congress party, and a good chunk broke apart, which included 15 odd MLAs from the Congress's fold. At that time, they had around 78 MLAs, and 15 they broke ranks and they joined the BJP. But largely speaking, BJP was still seen as a very cowbell-centric Hindi heartland party, with very little to share with the ethos of the Assamese people in general. BJP had 3 MLAs or 4 MLAs, I suppose, at that point in time, out of 126. Absolutely negligible presence. The party office used to look pretty lethargic then. Also remember that Lok Sabha was one area where BJP had been winning a lot of seats. Even in Atalji's time, they used to get 5 to 6 seats from Assam regularly. In fact, Sircar was one area where BJP has had a historical hold on. And even back in around 70s or 80s, they have been sending members of parliament or members of legislative assembly regularly from the Barak Valley. But overall in 16, the mood was pretty gloomy, and that is how the BJP started working and stitching alliances. Uh, but while it was doing, one common theme that BJP retained in mind was that it had to look and feel like a party belonging to Assam. And that is where fundamental changes in terms of political equations, bringing in every single tribe, speaking to their leaders, bringing them on our fold, was a very carefully and a targeted policy of the BJP then. BJP has largely been able to hold on to those various tribal parties and groups or groupings electorally. They've been able to consistently hold them. But where the BJP has, not been able to do pretty well is maintaining its alliance partner, the PPF, the Bodo People Front. Largely because of the fact that Hagrama himself has lost a lot of popularity because of the corruption charges that were there and the lack of development work which happened in PTC. But fast forward into 2021, we see that even if BPF goes, BJP has reached out to UPPL plus the broad Abodo people which are going to back the BJP this time. Looks like the BJP will still remain largely in good equation in Bodoland. I also see that all the other tribes, be it the Morang Mataks and the Sonowal Kacharis and Rabha, Tiwa, all of these tribes are largely going to be with the BJP. The big change in political alliances that have happened is that AIUDF, which was politically untouchable in the state of Assam for the Congress party, Congress realized that going without them this time would be disastrous for them. We remember in 2016 when we were doing very careful analysis, Congress and AIUDF in at least 10 to 15 odd seats were dividing their vote base in a way which was allowing the BJP to win those seats. And I think, and this is a critical chunk, 15 odd seats one way or the other can really change the number game. Therefore, I suppose Congress decided this time that, they have been behind the curtains trying to work with AIUDF to collaborate on certain seats, but they need to give a clear signal to the minority voters in so-called minority voters in Assam that there is only one entity which is going to safeguard their interests, and they had so far been pretty shy about it, but this time they were out in the front. I remember in 2016 when we had put a poster on a holding saying that Ajmal and Tarun Gogoiji were having a secret alliance. Tarun Gogoi really rebelled. He rebelled pretty aggressively because his entire politics had been about opposing AIUDF and their dominance over Assam politics. And he was cognizant. He was more Assamese first kind than an electorally hungry entity. This is what I always thought of Tarun Gogoi as. He understood that the Assamese sentiment, especially the sentiment in parts of Lower Assam and certainly in Upper Assam, are going to go against him if he openly allies with the AIUDF. So as long as he was there, this alliance couldn't happen. But he left, he departed, and this alliance happened. And I think it's a big double-edged sword for Congress to navigate through. It might give them certain dividends in certain seats around Middle Assam, but I strongly believe that they will not be able to craft that emotive narrative in order to build upon CAA and whatever little bit of rumblings around CAA might force people to go outside. So those people who thought that there has to be an option beyond the BJP because BJP is going down the route of CAA will not see Congress as a viable alternative, primarily because they have allied officially with a party which is seen as largely a Bengali Muslim migrant party.
Thank you, Rajat. I'm going to throw it to you, Arunabh. So maybe if you could comment a little bit of how you see the alliance with AIUDF working out, but also I think where I was going to go with this, Rajat also mentioned, which is to what extent is BPF the force that it used to be, and is it likely to change equations in a larger number of seats for the BJP in Congress, or due to sort of loss of popularity and the overall popularity of the BJP, the BPF is not quite as untouchable as it once was. So first, maybe a little bit about AIUDF and what you think about that alliance, and maybe what do you think about the impact that BPF might have?
Right. I mean, I slightly disagree with Rajat here. I mean, before Tarun Gogoi departed, I mean, it was he who had initiated the alliance. That is not to make a comment on his politics, but just that's more of a comment on BJP's hold on Assam at the moment, because when Tarun Gogoi thought that it couldn't have possibly made a dent without allying with the AUDF, particularly in Lower Assam. And when the alliance didn't happen last year, when Tarun Gogoi especially was particularly adamant that we shouldn't be an alliance with the AUDF, the AUDF always vindictively, made sure that they put up candidates in certain constituencies, Lower Assam, which led to votes getting split, and the BJP, gaining from it overall. So yeah, I mean, I don't think the Congress. I mean, in that sense, I don't think the Congress has much of a choice this time. But to ally with the AUDF, because electorally, because purely math-wise, the numbers say that the 2016 numbers say that if the Congress and the AUDF had gone separately, then it was, it would have definitely hurt the Congress. Then think about its impact in Upper Assam. There's undoubtedly going to be an impact. But one must also remember that Congress's reputation as a party which patronizes Muslims of immigrant origin, that has been there forever, and Congress has won election after election and gotten votes in Upper Assam election after election, including votes of including a large chunk of the Ahom votes and a large chunk of the Caste Hindu votes in, say, Jorhat, despite AIUDF or no, with or without AIUDF, Congress has that burden to bear in any case. It's not. I mean, in Assam, everybody looks at Congress as somebody as a party that has actively actively helped or settled Muslims of immigrant origin as a to inculcate a vote bank, right? So yeah, I mean, so I'm a little, I wouldn't, I think it's slightly simplistic to say that because the BJP has, because the Congress has allied with the AUDF, Upper Assam is going to completely stay away from the Congress. I mean, that's the narrative that the BJP has tried to create. I mean, it did the same thing on 16 also without a narrative. And so, with or, as I said, with or without AUDF, the Congress has that burden to bear. And with or without a formal alliance, the BJP is going to play that card in Upper Assam in any case. So I think for Congress, it probably made sense to just go with it this time. As the BPF, undoubtedly it's a force on the wane. Hagrama doesn't carry the kind of influence he did once upon a time. But I think what and there are, but then I mean obviously in the BKD areas, the 12 seats, right? And his BKs are definitely going to pull through in a couple of seats. So numerically, yeah, it does help Congress. But I think more than that, what it gives the Congress is some indigenous cred in Upper Assam, right? It can go. I mean, first of all, the BPF used to be a coalition partner of the BJP. So it's for the Congress to go and to go and tell voters in Upper Assam that, boss, we may be with the AUDF, but we're also with the BPF, and if the Boros are not indigenous, who the hell are more indigenous than the Boros, right? So that's something that the Congress can play with, and I think that's why it's an important that's with the short term. And the Boro vote does matter in a lot of other seats, across the North Bank, apart from the BKD areas. So numerically, definitely. But I think more than that, it also gives, it also helps, Congress shed some of the image that it has, had to bear because of the alliance with AUDF and its own reputation, of course, over the years.
Thank you. So I am not Rahul. Obviously, I'm Neelanjan. My computer was freezing, so you can see we're not too far from each other at CPR. So I switched screens. So that's So I think this has sort of given us a clear picture about some of the complexities of coalition formation in Assam. And as I started with, it's always messy, right? And I think that part of the challenge of what we're dealing with here is that so much depends on the ultimate narrative that is going to be crafted vis-a-vis these coalitions and BJP and Congress when people go to vote. What I wanted to do was to throw a question to Rajat now, which is to he started a little bit telling us about how the BJP built up in 2016, but I was wondering if you could shed some more light on, is there a sort of a distinctive strategy the BJP uses in the East and the Northeast? I mean, when we look at some of the leaders that have joined the ranks, Tripura is a very good example where essentially, the old Congress was gobbled up. But even in Assam, where we have, Sonowal, AGP, Himanta Biswa Sharma, who was a big Congress leader, and now we see also in Bengal, a large number of high-profile defectors from TMC in particular, but other parties as well. Is there a noticeable strategy, or is there a stated strategy within the party to think about how to manufacture party organization from existing party organizations? And I mean, something which you mentioned, which is always a bit of a mystery, right? Which is that you know we tend to believe that these kinds of leaders come and go. I think what the BJP has been able to show, and what you've suggested, is that not only are you able to bring them into the fold, but you're able to keep them, right? That these are not sort of, like they're not old time devoted RSS workers, right? These are people who work for other parties and they've come into the BJP fold. So what is it that is the sort of secret sauce potentially that we can see in the East and Northeast strategies of the BJP that's allowing this to happen?
Well, if they'll be able to keep it or not, time is going to decide, because once they'll be out of power, perhaps then you need to, see through as to how many people still are there. But one thing, I mean, clearly that BJP has understood is that it can't just rely on the existing
I think we've lost Rajat. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. We're having technical difficulties. So Arunabh, it's going to soon turn into, I mean, I'm not sure what internet at CPR is looking like, but it might turn into quite a small group by the time we're done here. Okay, so until Rajat comes back, I know he has an inside view on the BJP, but maybe let me start by throwing the question to you, right? Which is that, what is your, based on what you've seen, right? It is on one level, it's a hegemonic strategy, right? It's a peculiar strategy, right? Where the optimal way to build your party cadre is to essentially just eat up another party's cadre, right? And given that at least, oh, there's Rajat again. Maybe we can just, Rajat, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes. Okay. So why don't you just start over? I think we lost you about 2 seconds in.
Yes. Sorry about that. Can you please switch on my video? Okay. All right. I think everything that can go wrong has gone wrong today. There's a power cut. So now coming to the moot point around what has been the secret sauce around what BJP has been trying to work upon is that BJP understood that its predominant image is centered around a hard stand on nationalism. And how does that stand juxtaposes or dovetail with a sense of regionalism that has been the mainstay of the politics of the Northeast? And BJP understood this and tried to bring in a policy shift by convincing the RSS on one side and also convincing the leadership, the national leadership of the BJP, that they need to really bank upon the sons and daughters of the soil in the Northeast if they have to do something in this region. And they therefore had a very carefully crafted strategy to identify people who could perhaps suit the broad theme with which BJP wants to approach the Northeast. And this is where people like Himanta Biswa Sharma, who had also been, I had articulated this in my book also, had been in touch with the BJP way before 2014 elections too. He was in touch, he was brought in, there was certain set of arrangements as to what would be the policy stance that he would agree to, and would the BJP agree to that or not. And by the way, the Citizenship Amendment Bill was actually conceived around the year 2015. Not many people know that, and that was because of this again this dovetailing of two very conflicting interests of the Bengali-speaking people on one side who had migrated because of political and religious persecution, and on the other side bringing in the interests of keeping the interests of Assamese people safeguarded. So again, the Citizenship Amendment Bill was also thought through during that time in 2015. A bill was crafted then. It remained in a moribund state for a long period of time before it finally couldn't pass Rajya Sabha in 2019, and it was later introduced in 2019 in December, and it was passed then. So you look at Manipur for that instance. When BJP brought in the current sitting chief minister, Mr. N. Biren Singh, he was brought in on certain counts of very fundamental issues, existential issues of the state of Manipur. And those fell in line with pretty well with the BJP's thought process around Manipur and how to integrate that state with the larger Indian thought process. And they were able to bring in these people. And also over a period of time, as and when more and more people were joining, they were also sent to various organizations of the BJP and the RSS to fundamentally understand what they stand for. There were training sessions which were organized. So there has been, the task wasn't left. You just bring in the leaders, get them power, or they get us power or whatever, and the job ends there. It was not the case. There was a very clear-cut strategy around training the new set of people who have joined the BJP fold.
Arunabh, do you have anything to add here? In terms of, as I said, this is a particularly notable strategy of at least the top brass of a party, not necessarily being ground up, right? They are being trained. There's an allaying of fears and coalition building that is going on within the BJP. But what impact do you think that has on the kind of politics that is plausible for the BJP?
Right, I think Rajat explained this pretty well. I mean, as an insider view, I think it is an interesting, case study or way to look at, the BJP's modus operandi in Assam is looking at, the missing community, so the missing community, leaders, were all CPIML leaders. I mean, the top brass of the missing community, they all, and they were the ones who led the anti-dam resistance in Assam, right? And so that's how, I mean, the anti-dam resistance in Assam was very, very closely linked to missing politics, missing indigenous politics, missing nationalism, concerns with the river. And that was barely, 5 years back. Now, you go to the North Bank, there's no missing nationalism left. The BJP is, very strategically, made sure that, the top leaders have been brought into the fold. The cadre slowly, and we must remember that, I mean, the BJP may not have been in power for too long in Assam or the Northeast, but, the RSS has done a lot of work, I've met people from the Sangh in the most remote villages in Meghalaya, and people who have been working there for ages. So this is not, obviously, you've got to acknowledge and appreciate the fact that this is more than just, a political project. This is, an election project. This is a much bigger project, and I suppose one thing that I've always one must remember in Assam is that the BJP has not tried to make an UP out of Assam, to their credit. This is BJP form alliances, it's a very political BJP, as someone told me. It's a very Vajpayee BJP, in Assam. So the BJP has been very, to a large extent, very mindful of the cultural peculiarities of Assam. So I think that has helped them negotiate this turf quite well, and as somebody I think asked on on chat and Q&A, that I think it's an intersection of economics and identity, and the BJP has done the economics bit really well. I mean, for example, the scheme that they launched in December, the DBT scheme called Arunabh, 830 rupees, to around 22 lakh families across the state. I think that's going to matter much more than anything else, any ethnic questions. So I mean, these are the kind of things that people like us kind of tend to overlook. I mean, there's a lot of focus on ethnicity and identity, but I mean, just like any other state in the world, and any other state in the country, or any other place in the world, there's more to ethnicity. There's more to Assam than just ethnicity. So I think that the BJP has been able to understand well. So, and if you look at the Congress's campaign, the Congress began its campaign around the CEA, but slowly it's kind of drifting away from the CEA because it knows that it's probably not going to be as big a vote magnet as they thought. And the focus on when Priyanka Gandhi came, it all spoke about the gardens, and yesterday they released a job guarantee scheme, a proposed job guarantee scheme. So I think all those things, I think the BJP is tread the line of tread the intersection between economy and identity really well in Assam. I mean, that's what my reading is of the BJP's the scope with this politics for the last 5 years in Assam at least.
So maybe I'll just finish up, because I think both of you lead into one natural question, which I think many people will ask, and then I will throw it over to some of the questions that we're getting in the Q&A, and then obviously we'll sort of integrate it with our own discussions and our own questions. Maybe we can bring Rahul back in as well to ask a couple of questions as well. So I think the natural, we always wait for a while to ask the most controversial questions. So, the one, I think the question that animates discourse outside of Assam as well, right, is the question, so I'm going to lead into it a little more slowly, is how do you balance what might otherwise be prominent features of BJP's politics nationally with demands locally within Assam? So it can be something as simple as linguistic politics, which becomes quite complicated in terms of the BJP's status stand outside of Assam versus within. It can be the politics around vegetarianism and beef. And of course, it can be the politics around NRC, right? And so I'm just, I'm wondering, first maybe, either of you actually, because I think both of you observed how this balancing act is done. I guess what I would ask you to make this a little more precise is, to what extent are people willing to take this sort of dichotomy of what is being promised in Assam and what is being promised outside of Assam? And to what extent can this be a long-term arrangement or even a medium-term arrangement for the BJP vis-a-vis policy and the people of Assam, assuming that the BJP continues to rule, for a little bit longer than it is right now?
Should I go ahead?
Go ahead, Rajat. Yeah.
Okay. So, Neelanjan, what you see as a dichotomy, I personally feel, and this is my assessment of the ground situation, that this dichotomy has gotten less and less pronounced over the past 5 years, looking at the BJP's certain governance agendas which have seen the light of the day. As Arunabh was also mentioning, that ultimately it is a combination or a cocktail of identity politics on one side and development politics on the other side. I remember in 2015 when I first reached Gauhati. If you go onto the GS road, which is the main arterial road of the city, you would see largely there were small shops, there were small restaurants here and there. Even dining out used to be a big challenge. 5 years fast forward, and today, if you go on GS Street, even moving onto the GS Street is much of a challenge there. And you look at the amount of development across the length and breadth of just Gauhati itself, will give you the answers as to what has BJP unleashed in that state. There was this pent up, collective thirst for growing and breaking open the shackles with which the Northeast has been tied down for a very long period of time. A lot of big entrepreneurs from the mainland country didn't used to go to even Gauhati, which I personally feel is not even the Northeast anymore. But because the psychological fear was there that it's a violent state and you're going to experience all kinds of people trying to single you out, you being an outsider, and all of those things were there. But over time, BJP has ensured that law and order is no longer an issue in the region. BJP has also ensured that there is rapid pace of development, and with schemes like Arunabh and various other, even like giving a scooty to the girl student who gets a certain percentage of marks in their class 10th or 12th, has all had a massive amount of beneficiaries. If you look at the number of families which have been impacted, it goes to the tune of around 20 lakh families. That in itself is enough to swing an election in the favor of the BJP. In fact, even in Arunabh's scheme that was just mentioned, they're going to increase the amount that is being dispersed every month from 800 odd rupees a month to around 3,000 rupees a month. That's the promise. So a lot of people fear that if Congress is going to come, this amount is not going to be there anymore, and therefore they might also come in and stick with the BJP. So BJP has really handled this developmental question well. On the identity side, what they have done is and this was Himanta Biswa Sharma speaking, when he said that, see, the Assamese people, the ethnic Assamese people need to understand who their civilizational enemy is. And this word, quote unquote, civilizational enemy was used by him. He said that please understand that the Bengali Hindus who have been persecuted on religious grounds in the erstwhile East Pakistan had migrated because they had no other option. So you need to clearly identify the difference between people who came for economic reasons and those who were persecuted. Out of which the CAB was also created, out of this core understanding of the issue. And I personally feel that the BJP, with its leadership in the state, has been able to communicate this rather complex question that with people with a very high total fertility rate, belonging to Bengali Muslim community, is going to pose a bigger challenge to the population numbers of ethnic Assamese people who genuinely felt that they are becoming minority in their own land. And this was where BJP delineated these two things, communicated it well, explained the logic and the rationale behind CAB to the larger population. And this is why this acute amount of emotion that we all saw around the Citizenship Amendment Bill and later the Act was over the period of time that vicious reaction which had come in had actually blunted over time and had read less and less and less impact. And this is what Congress also understood. That is why they went, leaving the identity questions aside, went with an alliance which can at least ensure that Congress remains in the race. Otherwise, Congress was not even going to be in the reckoning. And I just feel that, how much has BJP been able to communicate on the CAA alliance will be put to test in these three phases of election. Another very important angle is the third front, so to say, which is still a very amorphous structure. But there is this third front which still is going to stick around with 25% of vote share. If they hold on to this 25%, it's going to really hurt Congress's chances to pose a challenge to the BJP, because BJP will continue to hold its 40% plus 2-3% extra vote base. And Congress is going to go Congress plus AIUDF, but AIUDF
Seems we have lost Rajat again.
We've lost Rajat again, no? Yeah. I think, until Rajat comes. Oh, Rajat, are you back?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Go ahead and fine.
I was just concluding. So the ethnic question on one side, the developmental question on the other side, and lastly, the electoral mathematics. That question too, BJP understands that the alliance of AIUDF and Congress is going to cut into 4, 5, 7, 8 seats or so. But it is going to cover up a certain number of seats in our Upper Assam and even in Barak Valley, which they have done exceedingly well in 2019 elections. And they will cover up the gap and will more or less retain the number of seats that they had in 2016 election. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, so Arunabh, over to you. I mean, so I think, there's a particular question or claim about how much this identity division, this question of people from Bengal versus Bengali Hindu and Bengali Muslim has been blunted as a political issue in a way that perhaps at one point was being used against the BJP, but is no longer potentially a serious problem for the BJP politically. I want to sort of throw one more log on the fire, and Rajat, you can also come in later on this as well, which is that there's one other complication in balancing this equation, which is that you will also have to say something in Bengal, and the politics of NRC is slightly different in Bengal, not dramatically different. I think people overstate the difference, but the politics of NRC in Bengal is different than the politics of NRC in Assam. And so maybe, sort of commenting on that as well.
Right. I think I think the BJP tends to mistake the reduction in the noise around CA as as people buying into the party and in particular Hemanta Biswa Sharma's narrative of the Muslims of immigrant origin being the civilizational threat. I don't think that has happened. And when I talk to people, who are going to vote for the BJP, are very wary of BJP's, civilizational aspirations, which they still believe are at loggerheads with their first and primary identity, which is of an Assamese. But the sheer juggernaut of BJP's populism, as I said, is so potent, and that it's going to override some of the concerns, right? At least temporarily. The BJP is not going to solve Assam's, the vexed citizenship identity issue. But temporarily, as an electoral politics, at least in terms of electoral politics, the BJP has found ways to circumvent and navigate around it, right? But that doesn't mean that anybody in Assam, people who oppose the Citizenship Amendment Bill, who came out in the streets opposing the bill, believe that the Muslim of immigrant origin is the civilizational threat as opposed to the Bengali Hindu. That is incorrect as far as I understand Assamese people and as far as I understand Assamese politics. But yeah, it seems to be so much of an issue, right, among a large section of the people. So that dichotomy will remain, and that dichotomy will remain, and that dichotomy is not going anywhere. Even in terms of, for example, the Moran talks, the Moran Student Union for matter, they're a potent force in Upper Assam, particularly in Tinsukia and parts of Dibrugarh. And the person who led the most powerful union of the Morans, has joined the BJP and has in fact been given a ticket, although I think the party hasn't officially released the list of candidates, but he has been given a ticket for. So that is, politics of, that's a certain amount of opportunism and, and how smaller communities also, negotiate with larger communities. So that doesn't, amount to the dichotomy disappearing anytime soon. So yeah, I think the dichotomy remains, yet the BJP has found ways with its populism, with its economic policies to navigate around it and circumvent it to a large extent.
Rajat, anything to add before I move over to the Q&A?
I think one perspective that needs to be kept in mind is around the Barak Valley question. And you need to understand that why has Congress become almost a negligible force in Barak Valley? They have also tied themselves in knots around the CAA bill. If you remember Sushmita Dev, when she was, I suppose she was a sitting MP. She was a sitting MP, and she did say that there is some merit in from the perspective of the Bengalis living in the Barak Valley, and Congress High Command should actually look into CA in a different light, keeping this perspective in mind. But her letter, when she had written to the Congress president, wasn't able to sway or bring Congress's attention to this issue. And Barak Valley people have largely understood that their interest, their future is with the BJP, much more than what they had initially in 2016 also perceived to be. That is why Congress, you see from 25, 28% vote share, has now gone down consistently, and you will see this happen even more, because they also realize that, again, there is some level of polarization with AIUDF really going pretty aggressively in certain areas. And Congress and AIUDF combined is going to play out in Barak Valley in very interesting ways, but it is going to counter-polarize as well. And I believe that the Bengali Hindus in Barak Valley will out and out, almost close to 90% plus, you can assume, are going to stick with the BJP this time. And Congress is going to have to sacrifice this traditional vote base of their party.
Provocative words, but I think a strong prediction. So we can actually test it on voting day, and I mean, the trend you do mention is correct, right? I mean, for those of you happen to be in a group where we all look at numbers, so we have seen what is going on over there. Let me move it to Q&A. Let me start by grouping two questions here. Let me talk about Harish the Moderator has asked, and we've touched on these things briefly, but I want to give one sort of full circle of questions on economic issues and welfareism, and the extent that that matters in the Assamese polity, and the extent to which that matters for voter choice. So Harish asked, to what extent will economic issues, petrol, diesel, LPG prices, and unemployment play a part in this election? Or will it just be about ethnic identities? An anonymous attendee asks, Arunabh mentioned welfare schemes would be an important factor in deciding people's voting decisions for the NDA. Has there been a genuine expansion in welfare schemes between the NDA government and previous governments? And is that a factor in explaining why Bengali and Assamese Hindus vote for the NDA, despite ethnic differences? And what I would just say, just so we don't sort of get, sort of circle around the same point, I would say the way that this question is phrased is slightly different than the explanation that Rajat gave for why Bengali Hindus and Assamese Hindus may be voting for the NDA together, right? So this is a logic which is saying it is about the reach of the welfare program, as opposed to a logic which says that the counterpoint to the BJP stand on NRC, CAA, and identity-based issues has become muddled in the opposition. Maybe Arunabh, why don't you start us off and then get back to Rajat?
Yes, I mean, as I already kind of fleetingly mentioned, I think economic issues are going to play a major role, but I'm not. I mean, despite the petrol and diesel prices, I think economics, in terms of economics, I think BJP probably still holds an upper hand in Assam, because it's there is a general perception, at least, that I think somebody asked whether the scope of the schemes have been expanded, or I think there is a general perception among people that the schemes have become easier to access, and so as a lot of, as I said, there's a barrage of populist welfare, whatever you wish to call them, schemes that the BJP has launched in the last couple of years. Free rice, subsidized kerosene. Then there is obviously DBT of there's a DBT scheme, 830 rupees, which they promised to take it up to 1,000 if voted to power. So I think that's a major factor. As to your postulation of framing it, I think for sure, I mean, I began this by saying that this is the BJP's election to lose, but that by no means translates into this is this is the cakewalk for BJP. A lot of the votes that BJP got in bulk, in 2016, the Ahom votes, for instance, the Hindu votes, for instance, the caste Hindu votes, for instance, for Assam, are going to go to Congress and the two new formations. So the BJP has its task cut out, and everybody in the party acknowledges as much. I mean, nobody here thinks that this is. I mean, 2016 was a much easier election to predict. 2021 is probably going to be one of the toughest elections we've seen in one of the closest elections we've seen in Assam in recent times. So yeah, I mean, the caste Hindu votes and the Ahom votes are not, BJP is not going to take them for granted this time, because the identity issues are also going to play out, particularly among a certain section of people, the middle class and the better to do, the identity issues are definitely going to play out among them.
Rajat?
I don't agree with the last part of what Arunabh said. This is not going to be as difficult as perhaps 16 was. BJP had almost no base then, and it was only an aspirational, some sort of a dream to break through Congress stronghold. Congress had all the leadership-wise, resource-wise, they were in power for all these years, had a solid face from Upper Assam, belonging to the Ahom community. I mean, just the social base on which Congress was standing. Along with that, this Apun Lagise kind of a face looks very, very Assamese face of Tarun Gogoi, was something that Congress could have, if it was successful in holding on to its politics, they could have perhaps sailed through. But the juggernaut of Prime Minister Modi then was also punctured to an extent that they lost 2 elections consecutively, Delhi and Bihar. And then they entered Assam with their shoulders drooped and were not very confident if they'll win through. So that was where BJP had started. But this time around, I feel that there is a new sense of commentary which I'm reading up, which says that, see, there has been a sudden rise in the Congress's prospects in the state. A lot of journalists are trying to quote, but where I fail to understand their assessment is, where are those numbers coming from? You look at Congress. First of all, it is a hugely divided house. There are at least 7 chief ministerial prospects within the Congress fold. Gaurav Gogoi is struggling very hard to hold on to the legacy of his father, because if it is not for this election, he will lose his legacy completely, and that is a challenge which lies before him. And then there are other leaders, Rakibul and all of these people, who feel that this is their chance and they should go all out and try and see that if they can be the leader and the face of the Congress party. So there is struggle, A. B, you will also see that, as I have said before, Congress is not clinging on to any emotive issue so far. They have understood that CA is a double-edged sword. They can't go both ways. They can't even, go out and talk about their AIUDF alliance, even in terms of signaling to the minority vote base. They can't even do that. BPF, which has come into Congress's fold, I again have a strong opinion that the Abodo plus the UPPL that combine, plus the sentiment. Remember, again, Bodo land had also seen massive this communal violence from between the Bengali Muslims and the Bodo people in 2012. Remember, they are not liking Congress's alliance with the AIUDF. So you will see even Bodos not siding with the Congress AIUDF combined. That is also an angle, keep that in mind. So if you actually look at the numbers, BJP had around 62, 63 seats in the previous assembly, plus another 20 odd seats from their alliance partners. It took them to around 88, 89, 90. I don't see, even if BPF goes out of the question, and still if we assume that they're going to win 4 or 5 seats, where will Congress look to in terms of reaching the midway path? I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening even in the central Assam area, where Mangal Doi, where you see that AIUDF and Congress really do a lot of tango together in that area to hoodwink and try and not come out in the open, but in the past they have really strategically allied in that region. But this time you will see, even there you will see polarization happening and BJP retaining. So number-wise, I don't see it much of a challenge. But of course, predicting Indian elections is always very difficult.
So let me just ask one more time. Is it? Are you able to hear me clearly, or is it cutting in and out?
You asking me?
Yeah. Are you able to hear me clearly? Yeah, all of you.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
it was a little bit increasing in my mind. Okay,
Yes.
so I wanted to sort of add to the comments because it's a very nice bridge, and as I promise, I'll get to all of the questions. Professor Hazarika asks, about deep divides in terms of community and ethnicities, are of course reflected in voting, and not just campaigns, but where are the sharpest contests? And let me ask this in a different way, right? Which is that in addition to the way that it has been asked here, so we've talked about where the Congress might suffer despite all of this sort of coalition. What is the worst case scenario for the BJP? What makes this, I think both of you have said the BJP seems to be ahead despite whatever challenges might exist on the ground. What is the worst case scenario? What makes this a difficult fight for the BJP? Rajat.
All right. So if you're not able to galvanize your base to come into voting, and that sense of the question where Congress finally coming out and going ahead with an explicit alliance with the AIUDF, it is not able to counter polarize, and your base doesn't turn up on the polling booths in the number that they did. I mean, 2016 was actually translated, politically speaking, as the last battle of Saraighat, the last existential battle for the fight of Assamese culture. If that sense of urgency is not getting translated to their voters, and you see lesser polling, you will see BJP losing out on 5-6 odd seats, and 5-6 seats moving from one fold to the other fold might do a lot of damage. A. B, and the last point is around the third front, so to say. You have this new formation of Akhil Gogoi and all of these various small groups coming together. I just saw ABP's opinion poll, and they say that group is retaining around 25% vote share, 25-27% vote share. If that percentage, this others segment, if that starts to disintegrate, and if it starts gravitating for one reason or the other, be it CAA or whatever, starts gradually migrating towards the Congress, you will see BJP finding it a little difficult, especially in central Assam and upper Assam areas. And that's when it gets a little difficult. These are the only two apprehensions that I have in mind.
Arunabh?
Yeah, when Rajat spoke about people coming out in large numbers to vote, but what he chose not to mention is there was massive anti-incumbency against the Congress in 2016, 15 years of anti-incumbency, right? So yeah, as in what Professor Sandhya Charika asked about, about the toughest contest, as I just pointed out correctly to a large extent, remember that, before 2016, the Congress had a really good rapport going on with Dahuns, right? Particularly courtesy, to a large extent, Tarun Gogoi. And you have Akhil Gogoi in jail, and for the last year and a half almost. So there is a real chance that the Ahums and the caste Indo-Assamese come out to vote against the BJP in large numbers, and that will also to a large extent depend on a strategic retreat by Congress in certain places in Upper Assam, letting the third front take the lead so that the anti-BJP votes don't get divided. And there's a possibility that it could happen, and things could really look bad for BJP, because as I see it, and the little understandable the electoral math in Upper Assam, the elections are going to be won and lost in Upper Assam this time. Contrary to what Rajat predicts, I think the BJP will definitely suffer, win a few seats, fewer in Barak Valley, and will suffer losses in Lower Assam and Central Assam to a certain extent. So if the BJP does not hold on to its base in Upper Assam, the districts of Tinsukia and Dibrugarh look fairly comfortable for BJP, but the middle Assam, basically the South Bank, basically Jorhat and Sibsagar and Saraighat, the three districts, where if the Assamese speaking population comes out in large numbers and decides to vote vindictively against the BJP, for emotional reasons, first of all, because Akhil Gogoi, somebody who did not have much of a suction with the middle class, but has gained a lot of sympathy. He's going to get a large chunk of Ahom votes in Sibsagar. And, if there's a ripple effect of that and the Congress retreats strategically, I think, things could get really interesting in Assam.
Those are quite different visions the two of you have, which is good for us. I think we can see the differences in the state of play. Let me I want to make sure that everyone sort of gets their question heard. And I see that Professor Hazarika has a follow-up question. I'll get to that in a second, but let me, because I know that some of these questions have been asked for some time. I want to ask the leadership question, right? So I think Utkarsh is asking us whether Himanta Biswa Sharma gets a senior role in central government post-elections. He's obviously very, very important for the Northeast. And, there's a question about how popular Sonowal has been, and does it make sense for him to be the CM face? So let me just sort of put a little more color on this for those of you that don't follow Assam as closely, or maybe you do, and just sort of the external appearance that there's a sort of a very strange two people at the top kind of scenario in terms of the way that a lot of people engage with Assam because of Sonowal and Himanta Biswa Sharma both being very tall leaders for the BJP. And so there are a lot of questions about, does Sonowal stay as CM? Is there another face? Is there somebody that adjudicates between those two? Does Himanta Biswa Sharma get moved to the center? Or does he have to contest elections in the normal way? Does he eventually become CM? I was wondering if, look, ultimately these are decisions that are made on complicated calculations. Nothing you say today will necessarily hold true tomorrow. But do any of you have any insight on these questions? Maybe Rajat, you start, and I'll move to Arunabh.
Well, I mean, inside or no inside, one thing is pretty apparent that BJP has enough. The size of the pie is big enough for the BJP to settle the leadership question. Also, no doubt, both the leaders remain very, very, very popular, and their popularity at this stage far overshadows anybody on the opposition side. And not just within Assam, they have a very good following in the neighboring northeastern states as well. So BJP also realizes that the leadership has, and as I said, it is not a zero-sum game between the two, and BJP will be able to settle this leadership question post the elections. But if you were to, just understand that how Dr. Himanta Biswa Sharma started his journey, he was a Congress minister, almost second in line, and if he had stuck with the Congress party, he would have certainly been the face of the Congress party. But he switched side, and not just alone, but he brought in a big fold of MLAs also. And he has really worked hard. He was seen as a typical lower middle class caste Hindu Assamese person with little appeal in the upper Assam region. But look at the amount of effort that he has put in order to earn a pan Assam following and pan Assam base, so to say, through various schemes that he has worked upon, popularized, and ensured that the beneficiaries actually get those benefits. Whereas Sarbada, when he comes into the picture, that he was also an AGP person, but also the advisor to ASU for a very long period of time. So he was also seen as somebody who is the true son of the soil. And coming from Upper Assam, the tribal face was a unifying or a rallying force behind the BJP and its various constituents within the state, because that gives them one reason to look up to BJP, that BJP can represent them effectively. So having said that, in short, Himanta Biswa Sharma has worked really hard, and he deserves some level of elevation somewhere. And also Sarbada has delivered on the representational question of politics, which is extremely important in states where identity politics is so critical.
Arunabh?
I don't think I have much to say on Himanta Biswa's future in the BJP. But looking at it from an outsider's perspective, I don't think. There's obviously a classic case of foreign ambition which was in public display, quite openly in 2019. But then I suppose it's a bigger question. It's a smaller question than it's being made out to be by a lot of people. I mean, I don't think. I mean, where else does it go? I mean, and I think. I mean, I don't. I mean, there's. I mean, a lot of people have said this is a parallel. This is a parallel plot in elections. Where does the BJP, fit Himanta Biswa Sharma? But I think the BJP strategy of having Sonowal as the CM face, particularly as Rajat pointed out in terms of in a state where ethnicity matters, I think worked out pretty well. And and Himanta Biswa Sharma does. I mean, contrary to what is, I suppose, is probably an unpopular opinion, but what I think is that it's the duo, they're quite complementary and to each other than what is made out a lot of times. I think they work completely fine.
Okay, so maybe I also wanted to ask you, Arunabh. So we've heard Rajat talk about briefly, but can you discuss something about some of the new regional formations that have come up? Maybe this sort of third-party formation. How much of a factor is it, or how do we make sense of it? I mean, I think for those of us, and I have not been closely following the last stretch of Assamese politics, it's hard for us to really make sense of what's going on there. Can you give us a little bit of a window into what these sort of new regional formations look like?
Right. I mean, I think the anti-CA movement birthed three political parties essentially. One's with the Congress, the Anshali Ganamorcha, which is the smaller of the three by a fair margin. Then the two bigger ones, the Hom Jatiyo Porikhod, which is basically the party launched by the All Assam Student Union and the AJYCP. Hom Jatiwadi Chhatra Porikhod. So that I mean they're the bigger party, and there's Raizordol, which is basically Okhil Gogoi's party, the KMS's party. I think the KMS is going to do. I mean, the KMS has a base in Lower Assam, So I suppose they do. They're not completely insignificant. But again, in Upper Assam, I suppose the two parties, they can actually be a formidable force. Again, if the Congress lets them be, I mean, the Congress has maintained that we have put, we've put our foot forward and told them that we wouldn't put up candidates with the contesting, but that hasn't worked out so far. But if the Congress still, kind of swallows its ego and lets the two parties, make the first move and put up candidates and then decide, where to contest, where to not. They could still be a formidable factor in certain areas, I suppose. In certain areas, as I said, in Sagar, but yeah, I don't think. I mean, Rajat referred to the AVP survey, whereas the C voter survey actually did not give them any seats, I think. So I suppose it's probably a little too early to also kind of to call on that, but yeah, I suppose in certain pockets they do have some amount of influence. So it remains to be seen how they exploit that over the next month or so.
Okay, so we have a number of questions here coming in at the last minute. I think people are seeing that we are soon closing up. Let me just sort of throw a couple of these questions out. We're just about to close up, so take whatever you would like here, and then also, please feel free to add anything that we may not have covered that you would like to sort of throw out there. So there's a question here about the core vote of the BJP in Assam. I think Rajat has actually discussed that in some detail since the question was asked. So Professor Hazarika asks about the Clause 6 report submitted months back. And the position that has or has not been taken by the BJP on the Assam Accord. Do you see how the BJP has handled this as having any political impact? I can guess based on some of the things that you've said, but maybe a more sort of, a very pointed question as to whether you think it's politically impactful. I think related to that, there's a question from Arun asking, when all is said and done, we do see, and this is a personal interest of mine, so I'm happy to sort of end with this kind of question. When all is said and done, we do see a lot of these complexities and contradictions that the BJP has to manage. Is it just a case that the BJP is doing a good job of communicating on CA in Assam compared to, you know, what it's done in other states or what it's doing with other parties? A final question that Utkarsh is just asking again, and if anyone has any deep insight, you can sort of answer it quickly. There's been news of the AGP founder, Prafulla Kumar Mohanta, joining Congress. Will that be crucial or not? I suspect not, but yeah, I leave it to the experts. So feel free to take any angle on these questions, and then we'll go ahead and finish up right around 7. So Arunabh, maybe you can start us off. I know you've been talking a lot, but
Yeah, actually. No, I mean, I think the question about the clause 6, I suppose, feeds into the issue we've been grappling with, and identity versus economics. I think it's a question about how much identity factor matters. So I suppose, as I kind of did speak about it, I think it'll matter in certain quarters of the state, but I'm not very sure it's going to be a defining factor. This election. And if it does, as I said, it's bad news for the BJP. And as per the communication of the CA, I think I spoke about in a fair amount of detail that no, I don't think that the BJP has been able to convince anyone in Assam the CA is a great thing, right? They may have they may have been able to co-opt leaders into community leaders into the fold. But that doesn't necessarily or automatically translate into the cadre believing it, which has not happened. So that contradiction remains as I put out. And I don't think the BJP has been any better at communicating the CA in Assam, than any other state. So yeah. And then there was Prafulla Mahanta. I really don't know. I really don't think that's going to be a factor.
One point where I agree with Arunabh is that Prafulla Mahanta does not matter in Assam politics anymore. So people, in my view, they don't care. But centered around clause 6 and CAA, see BJP, when they approached each of the states in Northeast, they had a clear roadmap. It was not just gaining power, but gaining power certainly was means to a larger end. The larger end being that these long these deep questions which had been holding the Northeast region back for a very long period of time were clearly not the way forward. They understood that some of these deep issues centered around identity have to be addressed in order for the region to progress. And this is the reason why they have carefully reached out to even in various separatist factions, be it the NDFP, brought them into the fold, helped them join the mainstream, look at the IAM's framework agreement with the NSC and IAM, or also certain groups, certain insurgency groups active in Manipur, trying to reach out to them as well. So BJP has a larger purpose. And clause 6 is addressing this Assamese identity question as to who an Assamese is and what protections need to be given to them. Is one question where BJP and some of the thinkers within the party constantly think and debate over, and it is their priority area. It usually, these are such divisive issues that right in the middle of the election, nobody would want to, nobody has a clear answer to some of these questions. And this is why a committee of all prominent people, all intellectuals within Assam were brought together to think and deliberate around clause 6 question, so as to understand what would be the final way forward for the party on these lines. I'm sure once they retain power, they are going to once and for all try and address this problem, be it through reservation in the assembly, in the state assembly, to the ethnic Assamese people, or some other formulation which broadly the community is in agreement with. So that's the part of seriousness around this. And around CAA and the communication, I just feel that CAA was essentially designed for the problems very, very unique to the Northeast region. It was taken to a national level because any law that you create cannot
be specifically applied to one region and not to the other region. And this is why a bill was brought out. But the intent of the BJP was largely around West Bengal, Assam, and certain sections in the neighboring states. We all understand that there was a sharp reaction as soon as CAA came in 2018 when Rajnath ji was the home minister. That was the time when, and I was also in Manipur, I know that Northeast reacted much more aggressively than the rest of India. But in the later part of 2019, when Amit Shah ji was the home minister, it was the other way around. It was the mainstream mainland India which reacted much more aggressively than what people in the Northeast did. Remember, Manipur also had deep issues with it, but a way out was found out through extending the ILP into that state. Meghalaya also reacted to it. But again, I personally feel that the communication around CAA and centered around what is the civilizational enemy of sorts, quote unquote, for the ethnic people of Assam. And they should delineate between people who have been politically persecuted and people who have come in for economic resources. That differentiation, at least BJP was trying to give one logic to it. Some people would have agreed, the others wouldn't have agreed. But largely, the sharp rhetoric around this issue was blunted to some extent, so much so that today it is not an emotive issue. And this is where I feel that the third front will not be able to create much of a dent either to the Congress fold or to the BJP fold, primarily because the emotiveness around this issue is no longer there compared to 2019 or early 20. That's what I feel.
Okay, that's a wonderful way to close up here. So I don't want to keep people. We've already troubled our eminent guests long enough. We've battled technology issues on every front. So I want to just thank you. It is really unfortunate that we were not able to get Sandhya ji back online. We do apologize for that. We seem to have had a host of technological issues in our various locations today, but we are very fortunate to get two really sort of eloquent and insightful opinions and views on what is happening in Assam from Arunabh and Rajat. And I want to just thank you from CPR. And thank you because I learned a lot. As I said, I was going to sit back and be an observer today and not give too many opinions. So thank you to you both. And we will be having our next CPR election. Adda, maybe Rahul, you can step in and help me here with the rest of the calendar.
10th on West Bengal.
On the 10th on West Bengal.
Good luck with that.
Huh?
I said good luck with that.
Good, exactly. That good luck with that, Rahul. And we will see you soon. We will be having events around all of the major states that are going to the polls this time. And you can see this is an attempt to sort of give a bit of an academic spin. We can ask more detailed questions than you might normally be able to do in many settings. And so thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you in our future events. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neelan, Arunabh, Rajat, and everyone who joined us today. See you on 10th. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.